The way we grow and evolve is through adaptation, and we grow through that adversity, and we grow through those challenges.
Welcome to Insights into Success, where with your host Paul Dodds, we hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Welcome to Insights into Success. Now, I don't typically do a recording like this prior to my interview, but I have to confess that I've been struggling as to what to do since this recording occurred back in October last year. Now, the issue with the recording is that my guest veers into American politics towards the end. Now, I've actually spent quite a bit of time since about 2015 learning about American politics and developing a reasonable level of knowledge. So in some respects it would be tempting for me to play it and get into political discussion, but that's not the basis of this podcast. This podcast is about helping people achieve their goals in life. So I've decided to edit out the political commentary towards the end. But there was something of particular concern which really undermined the interview, which is when the guest towards the end referred to the fact that he only gets his information from Twitter, or X as it's now known. Now, to me, that totally undermines the concept of critical thinking. Critical thinking requires you to get information, in my opinion, from a variety of sources and to analyse it and understand the potential biases that occur from one particular source. Now, that said, I still think that he made a lot of good points. I certainly don't agree with everything he said, but it's not for us to always agree, and it's healthy to have debate. So aside from the editing at the end, the interview is very much as it was recorded. What I'm also going to do, though, is record a response which will be then published probably 2 weeks after this interview is published, where I'm going to give my take on critical thinking, because I think it is something that's extremely important. I think there's a complete lack of it at the moment, and I think that society is paying a significant price, and it's only going to get worse the longer that people continue to not apply critical thinking, and in fact just remain lazy and just accept information without critiquing it. Anyway, I'll leave you to listen or watch the interview, but look out for my response in a couple of weeks where I give my opinion on critical thinking. Well, welcome to Insights into Success, where today our special guest is James Arthur Ray. Now, we've had James on before, and I'm really excited to have him back because the topic I want to talk about today is independent and critical thinking. Now, I think that's a really important topic because if we look through time, people such as Alexander Graham Bell, the Wright brothers, and so on, if they didn't have their independent and critical thinking, we wouldn't have some of the amazing inventions that we do have. So for me, it's an incredibly important thing that we all need to continue to do. And I'm very interested to talk to James Arthur Ray about this because this is something he's very passionate about. So thank you so much for joining me again on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you back. And I'm wondering if you could... Thank you. And I wonder if you...
Glad to be back. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, great to have you. And I'm just wondering if you could kick things off by telling me, do you think society, the way we're evolving, is actually threatening our ability to be independent and critical thinkers?
Yes. And I'd love to expand on that, unless you have a follow-up question. Yes, absolutely, because particularly in today's world where there's a lot of censorship and a lot of suppression of the truth. I mean, truth, if you just look around you very quickly, even a cursory observation of what's going on in the world, Paul, is that truth is not highly valued. And so consequently, we've been indoctrinated since the time we were born in what's right, what's wrong, what's valuable, what's not valuable. And psychology tells us that the ages between 14 and birth are the most important years of our life. And that's where we're really conditioned into a certain way of thinking, into a certain way of valuing, into a certain way of deciding. And so it's very, very difficult without what has been called a significant emotional event in psychology to shift that kind of thinking and to shift those values and shift that way of thinking for yourself. Very few people think. They think, but they don't really think. What they're doing is rerunning a conditioning or a program that's been handed to them from a very early age.
Yeah, and obviously parents are a key role models in the upbringing of their children. So much of what children come to believe is indoctrinated on in them by their parents.
Well, not only their parents, but their school systems and their clergy and social media now and the media as a whole is constantly conditioning us on what to think. And there's a whole lot of facets beneath that thinking. What we're committed to at Harmonic Wealth Global, which is mine and my wife's company, is to help people stop and begin to think for themselves. And to begin to do that, you have to understand some fundamental principles and you have to put those into practice. It's not easy, but it's well worth it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and I was actually going to talk about later, but bring it up now, is that is it not the case that people can become lazy and it's just easy to accept rather than to question and to investigate, than to form your own opinion?
Yes, I should remember, but what country are you in, Paul?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Yeah, I can't speak for New Zealand, but I can speak for humanity in general, and I can certainly speak for America. America has become way too comfortable and way too compliant and has had it way too easy, quite frankly. If you look at our ancestors, they had difficult lives. They had a lot of challenges to deal with, and they had to think for themselves. And unfortunately, we haven't had enough of those challenges in our world at large of late until the last probably 4 years. We've experienced those quite tremendously, even in New Zealand, I know. And so it's in the challenge, the crucible of challenge, that we literally grow the most, learn the most, and become the most. And so when we're not facing challenges, then we don't evolve in our consciousness and in our awareness. And that's true. Like, for instance, I'll give you a really simple example. The dolphins, a lot of people want to claim that dolphins are more intelligent than humans. Well, I'm going to contend that they're not, although I know they're intelligent because the dolphins have absolutely no predators in the ocean. Zero. Even a shark cannot deal with a dolphin. They're just too fast. And so consequently, the way we grow and evolve is through adaptation. And we grow through that adversity and we grow through those challenges. Most of our particularly younger generations have just not faced enough challenges. And so therefore they've become very complacent. And it's much more than just the parenting, but that's a big part of it because
Sure.
all the way back to the women's liberation movement, we have started destroying the nuclear family. And so consequently, women during that time began to be indoctrinated that it wasn't a good idea to be a stay-at-home mom, and it wasn't valuable to not be able to get a great job in corporate America. For instance, I'll just speak for America, in the corporate
Yeah.
world. And so they started to compete with men, and therefore a lot of children, particularly from Generation X and on, grew up in single family households. Therefore, our young men, for instance, are not really men. Now, there's exceptions to every rule, but if you look at
Yeah.
our young men, they're not men. They're soft, and they've grown up on an Xbox and an iPad and playing games all their life versus getting out and being rough and tumble. And those kind of things, although they're difficult and it's difficult to get through them at a young age, those
Mm.
toughen you up and they make you grow and they make you think and they make you adaptable. And I'll say this, and then I'll throw it back to you, is that there's mounds of research on what's called AQ. Now, there's different kinds of intelligences. We're a world that is enthralled with IQ. We take tests to try to measure our IQ and think about how intelligent we are. But the fact is that there's a lot of different types of intelligence. There's AQ, which is adaptability intelligence. There's EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And there's now SQ, which is spiritual intelligence. And we don't put a lot of emphasis on any of those other than IQ. Well,
Mm.
research has proven that adaptability intelligence, AQ, and emotional intelligence, EQ, are far and away more predictive of both life, relationship, and business success than IQ ever will be. I'm sure you, like me, know someone who's highly intelligent, but they're an emotional child. And you can be
Yeah.
you can be a master of your intelligence and still be a slave of your emotions. And so consequently, we haven't had to adapt. We haven't learned to become emotionally intelligent. We haven't learned, certainly, to become spiritually intelligent. And that's been a theme all the way back. Again, the women's liberation movement started separating families in a nuclear unit, which is critical for a child's upbringing. And then even before that, when you go back to what was called the Enlightenment in philosophy, that's where we started moving away from God, moving away from our heart and our feelings in the philosophical realms, and starting to move into our intellect. We have become so intellectual in our world right now that we've disconnected from our heart, and we've certainly disconnected from a creator.
And given that, though, how would you propose that we turn the tide and start moving back in the direction that we should, and getting back to more fundamentals, and allowing children to explore and develop without, you know, the modern day aids that we've got?
Well, that's a tough question. It's a great question, Paul, and it's a tough. I should say it's not a tough question. It's a tough thing to do, because
Yeah.
what we have to do is not regress to ancient times, but we have to take the wisdom of our history and bring it into the modern day world. In my latest book, God, Money, and Sex, and the subtitle is Understanding and Overcoming the Three Human Dilemmas. And I suggest those are the three human dilemmas: God, money, sex. And in that book, I talk a lot about how we've gotten away from fundamental principles. If you look at, I have a background in philosophy and all the great religious traditions as well as business. And if you look at all the great philosophers, if you and name them: Socrates, Plato, Jean-Paul Sartre, you could just keep naming the names, George Hegel. They all tell us how to live. They don't tell us how to make money. Not one of them told us how to make money. And unfortunately, that's the second human dilemma: money. We have become a materialistic and a money driven society. And so consequently, what do our young children do? Well, when I was growing up, which was quite some years ago, I wanted to be an astronaut, or I wanted to be a fireman, or I wanted to be a pilot, or I wanted to be, something as it was exciting, a pirate. And you might say, well, those are childish ideas. Well, yes, they might be. And yet, what do you find in today's world? You ask young children, and the research bears this out. What do they want to be? I want to be an Instagram influencer. Well, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
And how do you become an Instagram influencer? By showing your abs or by getting the most followers? I guarantee you this: if you have the most followers, you're not really making a difference, because the younger generations are telling us that they want to make a difference. That's very commonly heard. I want to make an impact. I want to make a difference. Well, let me promise you this: if you want to make a difference, you have to be and do something different. And I pause there intentionally, because if you're doing the same old things that everyone else is doing, that's the controlling narrative. You're not going to make a difference. You might make some money, but you're not going to make a difference. And so we need to get real about who we are. We need to get back to the fundamentals. We need to study the ancient teachings of the Christ and Plato and Socrates and all the great philosophers who told us how to be people filled with character, people filled with principle, people filled with values and virtues. And when we come to that point, then we start to apply those in a new way of behaving and living.
I can't help but reflect on, the changes with, the advent of social media, and just looking back that, say when I was at school, you'd have a project and you'd go to the library and you would look up various books and you'd research the answers, and because you're using the books, you might get varying answers to the same questions or the same problems, and then you'd form an opinion based on your research and write your essay or complete your project or whatever it was. Whereas now with social media and that, and with Google, um, people aren't doing that so much. People will now just go on Google. If they want an answer to something, they go on Google and they're just taking whatever's on Google as being fact, which may or may not be the case. So I can't help but wonder whether, social media, amongst other things, has just made us really lazy.
It's made us incredibly lazy. The average individual, according to research now, has about a 6-second attention span.
Mm.
And I notice, in on your podcast, you talk about everybody needs more time. If you can't listen to the full podcast, listen to part of it. Well, that's a shame that we have to say that, because you can you can listen and still do other things. Now, I'm not advocating that, because
Yeah.
that's a problem too. Because if you're not listening and focusing, then you're not focused and your mind is diverted. And yet it has made us incredibly lazy. When you talk about being an independent thinker, one of the things that my wife Bearsma and I constantly tell our clients is you have to think for yourself. And they go, well, how you do that? Well, you have to, don't take my word for it. Don't take anything I tell you for granted. Don't take it at face value. Do your own research. Well, I had one podcast host say to me, "Well, that sounds like a lot of work." It is
Yeah,
work.
it is.
That's what it takes. And so consequently, we have become incredibly lazy. We can Google something and God knows, it's pretty well proven that Google is owned by the system, and they're going to bring up things that not only are part of the collective narrative, but they're going to put way down in the feed, if at all, anything that disagrees with the controlling narrative. And so consequently, there's a lot of people, and these aren't typically younger people. These are people in their 50s, 60s who are watching mainstream media. Well, it's been proven time and again, mainstream media is not journalism. It's propagandism, and it's driving a controlling narrative, and they're not telling you the truth. When I was growing up, if I heard something in the media, I
Yeah.
believed it. I thought it was true. Well, it's not that way. It wasn't even that way maybe then, but now it's way, way worse than it ever was. And so consequently, we do have to take the work. We do have to take responsibility, and that's the only way we take our power back, because otherwise you become nothing more than an artificial intelligence. And I use that AI intentionally because we hear a lot about concern about AI, and for good reason. But I would
Mm.
submit that most people are AI. They're artificial intelligence. They don't have their own intelligence. They don't have their own thoughts. And I could prove this to anyone who wants to disagree with me. If I get you to really be honest and to boil down, why do you value what you value? Why do you think what you think? The reality is it was handed to you from an outside source at a very early age, and you've adopted it, and it's been reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and you've taken it as truth.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, yeah, you can't deny that. The thing though, one of the things that concerns me though is like, okay, we go, right, I'm not going to take what I hear as just being fact. I'm going to research it. But with technology being the way it is, the algorithms that are in place, you could go onto these different platforms and just get the same rubbish, because it picks up on what you're looking at and then feeds you information to support what you're already looking at. So you might have a view on an event, for instance, which is totally wrong, but you go online onto some of these platforms and you start searching it, and you could just get more information that's just reinforcing a view, which is complete nonsense. And you see that with a lot of the people with conspiracy theories, and that where some of them, they just keep going down the same rabbit hole, and rather than getting information from a variety of sources and then looking at it and comparing it and critically analyzing it, determine what makes sense and what doesn't, they just get fed the same information and just go further and further down a rabbit hole.
Yes, and get reinforced, reinforced, reinforced,
Mm,
reinforced. You're right. And so you have to get even more creative. Like, I don't use Google. I refuse to use Google, and I have
right.
no financial interest in any of these things, but I have an interest in myself. I use some of the search engines that block out those that are trying to track me, because here's what I know about Google, and you're absolutely correct, Paul. You type in 2 words and it'll give you the whole thing you're looking for. Or 1 word sometimes, it'll give you, well, how do they
Yeah.
know that already? I heard JFK or RFK Jr. JFK. I heard RFK Jr. say recently that he and his wife were talking about one night that they needed a new mattress for their bed, and they both had their phones in the bedroom, and the very next morning they pulled up and the first ads that were in their feeds were ads for mattresses. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fact that even this medium we're on right now is being monitored, and it's being listened to. And so consequently you have to have a lot of courage, because truth is not valued in today's world. Look around. Truth is persecuted in many cases, and in some cases prosecuted. And so what we have to have, there are three fundamental principles that we work with at our company, Harmonic Wealth Global. There's consciousness, there's communication, and there's culture. And let me describe each of those three. And then there's four practices that underlie those three principles. Consciousness is our whole body of thought. It's not just the brain. It's your thoughts, your feelings. It's all the things you're consciously aware of. And if you look throughout history, I've mentioned a couple of times the so-called Enlightenment period in in philosophy, which was not really enlightening. It was darkening, because we went from being connected to heart, being connected to principle, to being connected to intellect, and reason was driven home and home and home and home again during that period. But if you look at any kinds of major shifts that have happened in the world, and that would be one, it's happened from a shift in consciousness. That's one example. Another example would be equal rights. Had to be a shift in consciousness before people started to think and do differently. Second piece is communication. And communication is, once you have that shift in consciousness, then you have to be able to communicate that clearly and succinctly. And one of the most fundamentals, I've mentioned this already, in your communication is communicating the truth. And you hear today, well, you have your truth, Paul, and I have my truth. Well, that's rubbish. There's one truth,
Yeah.
truth and truth. And a lot of us are afraid to speak the truth, because it was Friedrich Nietzsche, the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who said nothing is more hated than the truth, because most people don't want to lose their illusions. And
Yeah.
and he's absolutely correct. And so we have to be able to communicate that conscious shift and communicate where we're coming from clearly and succinctly. And then third is culture. And culture is the collective values, beliefs, assumptions, perceptions, morals, virtues, principles of everyone. And if you look at the world today, we are desperately in need of a cultural shift. We have gotten so far away from principles and virtues and values, and it's been sold really well. Been sold
Mm,
really well. There's so many things I bought into early on, like for instance, the Green New Deal. I paid thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in carbon offsets at one point in my career, because I thought, okay, well, it sounds good. We need to take care of the planet. But there's
yeah.
mounds of research now that proves that carbon dioxide is good for the planet. It's good for humans. It's good for plants. It's good for animals. And they just keep selling it. But I'll tell you, a lie told repeatedly is never going to be a truth. And
No.
so that's become part of the culture. and we have to shift that culture as well. So there's consciousness first. That's me and my way of thinking and being, and then there's communication, my way of communicating to the best of my ability, and then there's culture. How can we collectively do those things as well? And if you'd like me to talk about the four fundamental practices underneath that, which help you become an
Sure.
independent thinker, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, tell me.
Well, the first one is you have to take absolute responsibility for your life. Now that's a tough pill to swallow. And
Yeah, yeah,
I say to people all the time, Paul, do you like what's going on in the world right now? They go, no. And so I say, how did you contribute to it? They go, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not in government. I don't have any power. I didn't control. Oh, yes, you did. You know, how long have you been complacent? How long have you been lazy? How long have you been compliant? How long have you been asleep at the wheel? Did you vote in the last election? Well, if the answers to those questions are what they normally are, then you're absolutely responsible. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And I've had to swallow that pill numerous times in my own life with very difficult situations. But once we take absolute responsibility for our lives, only then do we have the power to take our power back for ourselves. The second step is self awareness. We have to become really aware of ourselves. And I've mentioned some of these things already through some probing questions. And you have to be honest. You know, why do you value what you value? Why do I think what I think? And well, that's just what I think. I wouldn't be so sure about that. You know, why do you value a Bentley more than you value a BMW? You know, the 750 BMW and the Bentley are almost the same identical car. And yet I've asked audiences who would rather, if I was going to give you a Bentley or a BMW, who wants the Bentley? And people raise
yeah.
their hands. It's the very same car, same chassis, made by the same company. The accoutrements are a little different. But why do you want the Bentley? Because you've been programmed that it's more valuable. And you've been programmed that it makes you have some kind of image or some kind of standing in the world. That's not your way of thinking. That's not your value. That's been handed to you. And so when you boil it down, I said this earlier, and I'll say it again because it's important. The things that you think and value, if you're really honest and you trace it back to where it began, you'll realize they're not your thoughts and they're not your values. They've been handed to you from an outside source, the collective narrative from your parents, which may or may not be right, may or may not be empowering. And that's where you become more self aware. The third principle is kind of a shift from absolute responsibility and self awareness. The third principle is you have to clean up your diet. And you go, wow, that's a real different angle. Well,
Yeah.
here's the fact, Paul. How many times do you, like me, hear, you know, change your thinking, change your world? You know, what you think about comes about. Those are all great memes, but the reality is when you have a toxic brain, it's very, very difficult to change your thinking, if not impossible. Our body has 150 trillion cells, and every one of those cells holds chemicals, they hold memories, they hold all kinds of things that we put into ourselves for a long time, both with our thoughts and feelings as well as our diet. And so consequently, when you clean up your diet, you start to think more clearly. I mean, here's a fundamental fact that's been proven medically. Sugar is one of the most detrimental things you can eat for your brain. It's horrific for the brain. And guess what? So is alcohol and so is marijuana. Now that may not be popular, but there's mounds of research where they've hooked up people and tested them with EEG machines and brain scans, and those things are very detrimental to the brain. Alcohol and marijuana both kill the brain cells. They cut off the cerebral cortex, which is where you do your critical thinking. And so consequently, you've got to clean up your diet. And that's a long haul. And that's difficult for a lot of people because there's been a
Sure.
concentrated effort to put poisons into us through our diet, which literally change our DNA. They change our way of thinking. They change our abilities to be in control. And so then fourth is you have to deal with your unresolved emotional issues. And this is a long journey too. You know, here's what happens. when we're young, again, usually from 0 to 14, birth to 14, we have traumatic issues. Now, trauma, I'll put in quotes because it could be sexual trauma, which is really intense, or it could be a trauma like your parents got divorced, or it could be a trauma like moving away from your friends when you're in grade school or high school, which happened to me. I mean, those are traumatic things for young people. And so consequently, we don't have a lot of resources when we're really young to deal with those kinds of things. We don't know how, we don't have enough life experience. And so consequently, we power through and we do our best to get through it and to survive. And that's okay in the moment, but it becomes long term very detrimental because as we get into our 40s, 50s, 60s, those things have been suppressed and they're still there. They've never been dealt with. And that's what we'll call unresolved emotional issues. And they drive behavior. Psychology tells us that 95% of what you do every single day is driven by your unconscious mind. 95%, Paul. And so what
Incredible.
it's a lot. And so consequently, what that means is you and I every single day operate on 5% of our capability, our conscious mind. But 95% is driven through unconscious, unresolved emotional issues. And so the work that we do is to help bring those up into conscious awareness. And only when you bring those unconscious issues up into conscious awareness can you observe them and you can then heal them and integrate them and literally set yourself free. You get a tremendous amount of energy back because everything is energetically connected. Quantum physics calls that non-locality. Maybe you've heard of that. And it says that any two electrons that are connected stay eternally connected across all space and time. Now that's really profound when you think about it, because every single thing that has happened to us in our past has an energetic connection back to our past, and it's out of our awareness. That's the rub. It's very hard to deal with something you're unconscious of. But when you become conscious of it, then you go, wait a second. I'm making decisions based upon when I was 5 years old, something that happened to me when I was 5 years old, and I didn't have a lot of resources like I do now. Well, what's been proven psychologically is that when we go back and revisit those things with new resources, with new awareness, with more life experience, then you can never view them the same way again. And so you integrate those things and you literally bring back some of your energy. Why is it that Gallup's recent poll says 43% of the people surveyed are, quote, too exhausted to perform in their daily work? 43%. Why is
Wow.
that? That's a lot. Well, there's a
Mm.
whole host of reasons. It's practice number 3 is diet. There, if you're putting low performance fuel in your body, you're going to have low performance and low energy. It's also unresolved emotional issues because if you're feeding unconsciously all these emotional issues that happened to you when you were much earlier in age, then that's part of your energy that's not here and to be utilized in the moment. And so when you do those things, you can literally start thinking for yourself. And I'm not going to say it happens overnight. It doesn't. You know, I've been on this journey since I was in my early 20s, and that's a lot of years. That's decades of years, over 40 decades. And so consequently, it takes a commitment and it takes a discipline and it takes a willingness and a persistence and a perseverance to be able to commit to those things. And unfortunately, most people just aren't willing to have that kind of willpower and that kind of perseverance.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And I guess the word that just jumps into my mind is, as a generalization across society, is we've become increasingly lazy, and society is evolved to the point where everything's about making things easier for us. You mentioned about sugar before. I think of ready-made meals and getting information. You're going on Google and so on. It's all about making things easy and for us not having to do the work, and that's where it concerns me.
DoorDash.
Pardon?
DoorDash. Do you have that in New Zealand?
Yes, well, a similar one, yes, absolutely. So, and we're becoming increasingly lazy. So, I listen to what you're saying, and I don't disagree with any of it. But my thing that screams out to me is that most people be too lazy, that it just sounds too hard. It's too much work.
Well, you're right. And Here's what the Toltec traditions. I've been very blessed to be schooled in all great religious traditions. My father was a Protestant minister, and I'm really grateful for that. I grew up under the teachings of the Christ, and I'm very, very committed to living those kinds of principles. And yet I've also studied Judaism, and I've studied Islam, and I've studied not Islam as much. I've studied at Islam, but I've studied Hinduism, and I've studied a lot of the ancient traditions as well, the sacred teachings like the Toltec. Toltec is a very powerful teaching that comes out of South America. And what they say in the Toltec is spot on. I love the Toltec tradition because it's very graphic, and you'll get a visual when I tell you this. But they say most people don't do what's necessary to change until they're backed into a corner with a dagger hanging over their head. And that's the truth. Until
Yeah,
life pushes you into a corner where there's no way to go and you go, "God, help me. I've got to do something different." You're
yeah,
probably not going to do it. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's
no,
how it most commonly is. When people are pushed to the limit and they realize they have no choice but to do something different, that's when they're willing to make the commitment to do the hard work. Because let me just tell you this. Let's get rid of the romanticism. Life is hard. And anyone who
mm,
tells you that it's not hard is not telling you the truth. There's so many people in personal development running around going, "Oh, there's 3 easy steps," or there's, "Download this swipe file," or whatever. "You can make $1,000,000 following my lead on the internet." And everybody's looking for the quick fix, and they're looking for the
absolutely.
quick hit. Well, there's no quick hit, and there's no quick fix, and there's no easy. I know I've worked with a lot of millionaires and billionaires, and I'm not about the money at all, but I've worked with a lot of those individuals who are absolutely miserable. They're miserable. If you think let's look at Elon Musk. He's the richest man in the world right now. Do you think he has an easy life? No.
I think
He's
so.
he's he's running multiple companies, he's running all over the world, the government's coming after him, people are slamming him, he doesn't have an easy life. There's no easy, because easy and great, please listen to me as a viewer. Easy and great cannot coexist in the same space. They don't they don't resonate with each other. Life is going to be hard. Now, here's my point. The work that I'm talking about is hard work, but you can be hard work and you can do the hard work and be free and be independent and have your liberty, or you can do the hard work and be a slave. Either way, you're going to work hard. So you might as well decide to work hard to take your power back and to have your own freedom.
So, how do we address things so that our children are better equipped to deal with the trauma that they may face at the time and not have to, seek out counsel at a later stage in their life to try and address the issues that occurred to them when they were younger?
Well, it's not getting better right now. It's getting worse, quite frankly.
Mm,
And I'm not a pessimist by any stretch of the means, but I am a realist. And if you look at what's going on, it's getting much more difficult. The men in today's world, our sperm count is decreasing by 1% every single year. A lot of young men, and I know mothers who have young boys, and they don't even have a sex drive. They're so caught up in pornography, they can get a quick fix right now, and they don't have to do any courting or any communication or any kind of work. And so consequently, it's a big job. And that goes back to the shift in consciousness. We have to say, who are we going to be as a society, as a humanity, as an individual? Who are we going to be? And consequently, it has to start at an early age. Single parent households are replete in the world. And so consequently, a woman, and this may not be popular, but it's true. And just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. A single woman cannot teach a boy how to be a man. She
Yeah.
can't because she's not a man. And I don't care if you are a pretend man in a woman's body, which doesn't exist. God created two genders, and that's a fact, and we know that there's XX chromosomes, there's XY chromosomes. We also know through psychological research that a male and female's brains are completely different in how we process information. And so I don't care if you put a dress on or not, you're not a woman. You're still a man. And so consequently, there's been a concentrated effort, Paul, and this is unfortunate. And, unfortunately, things that used to be quoted conspiracy theories are now coming to realize that they're truth. And so we've got to stop, and we've got to start realizing who we want to be. And this, I'm not in government. You're not in government, I don't think. And so you go, well, how can I do this? Well, you do it with yourself. You take absolute responsibility for your life and for everything that's going on in the world. And you know that you've contributed to it because Carl Jung told us, back in his psychological research, and many other ancient teachings have told us that there's a collective consciousness, and they put a lot of different terms on that, but there's a collective consciousness, and every single thing that you and I think, feel, or do puts into that field. And so consequently, you cannot not change the world. Here's news for those of you who are younger. I want to change the world. Well, you are changing the world, because every single thing you do, Paul, and that I do, makes an impact on the collective consciousness. And so consequently, if we get enough critical mass in the collective consciousness, the entirety of the culture shifts. And that takes, commitment and awareness. And the good news is we live in very turbulent times right now. I don't like it, you don't like it. We've got but in the book of Ephesians, Ephesians 6 says we struggle not against flesh and blood. We struggle against principalities and powers. We struggle against the forces of darkness. We struggle against the spirit of evil in high places. And that was the Apostle Paul writing to the Ephesians. And you can see that's going on in the world today. We are not in a war about New Zealand's government or America's government. We're not in a war of fundamentalism or conservative versus liberal. We're not in a war of Democrat versus Republican, if I can use the American terminology. We're in a spiritual war. And that's where that SQ comes into effect. There is 95%, I already mentioned this, 95% of what exists in this universe we can't perceive because we don't have the acuity, the sensory acuity to perceive it. We live in a 5% world, and to the degree we look at the physical world, we're looking at the 5% world, and we're making our decisions based upon the 5% world. But that means we're negating a 95% that is beyond this world, that is every bit as much driving this world as the 5% is, if not more so. I mean, 95 compared to 5% is a large difference in percentages. And so we've got to go back and study the ancient philosophers. And what I said earlier is and this is what, we have a group mentoring that gets together every other Thursday night, and we're going through the great philosophers. And the reason that I'm doing that is because they've spoken to me. And consequently, when we hear their teachings, when we hear what they talk about, then we begin to have an awareness of that. And that builds sparks a neuron in our brain. And we go, hey, wait a minute. If something is that ancient and that old, and it still resonates true to me today, then maybe I should pay attention to it. And we're getting that critical mass. I believe that. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm an activist. I think, optimists tend to look at things with rose-colored glasses on, and pessimists look at the world's going to hell. Well, I'm right in the middle. That's what I'd call an activist or a realist. I see things exactly as they are. The Buddha taught us one of the greatest causes of suffering is that we don't see life clearly, exactly as it is, not better than it is, not worse than it is, but exactly as it is. And because we're going through these turbulent times right now, there's no better time to wake up, to clean up, and to grow up than there is right now, because a lot more people are waking up and they're going, "Hey, I'm not going to buy this at face value anymore. I'm not going to just buy in because someone in quote authority is telling me so." Who gives them the authority or the right to do that?
Yeah, you can't. I can't help but think that we just have a lot more noise going on in the world these days. But if we look back to the great philosophers and that, I mean, if we boil it all down, strip it all back, then why wouldn't what they have had to say be relevant to us now? It's just we've got so much more noise going on, and we need to strip that back and get back to the fundamentals of life. And that when you do, then what they have to teach us is totally relevant. But it's so easy to dismiss it and go, well, that was another time. Things are very different now. But it's just we've got a lot more noise going on.
Well, things are different now, but only on the periphery. It's
Mm,
only
very
it's
true.
only the external things that are different now.
Mm,
And so consequently, it's also the years and centuries and decades of programming that we've had, depending on how long you've been on the planet, that are different now. And so it goes back to what was the culture like when I grew up. For instance, I had mom was at home when I came home from school. Mom was there, and greeted me when I came home, and she had, "How was your day at school, son?" And we had a conversation. My dad was out saving the world.
yeah,
That's what a man is supposed to do. He's out conquering the world. And every single woman that I've talked to who will be honest will tell me that's the kind of man she wants. She doesn't want a weak man. She doesn't want some kind of posy or wallflower. She wants a man who she knows he's got this handled, and he's standing for what he believes in, and he's not
yeah,
afraid to tell the truth. Well, that was my dad. And so
yeah,
consequently, when we had breakfast, we had breakfast together as a family, sitting around the table, and we didn't have the TV on, and we didn't even have smartphones back then, so we certainly didn't have
yeah,
social media.
yeah,
We had connectivity and communication. Second fundamental principle. We had communication about what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. And we had role models, the father, a godly father in a household, a principled father, a strong man, a courageous man is a symbol of God to the child. The child looks up to dad as a god in some sense. Now, as we get older, we start to realize dad has faults and dad isn't God, but the mother is the nurturer. That's inbred in her, that is to nurture and to care for and to take care of. And there are children who have grown up and their parents, their mom, for instance, has never given them any kind of affection or any kind of nurturing because
mm,
she's too busy working. And so are we going to be able to turn that clock back? Well, probably not, because of inflation and the economy and all those kinds of things,
yeah.
which I believe fundamentally has been done on purpose. It's driven the family apart, and it's driven us to listen to outside authorities who are our heroes in today's world. They're celebrities, they're actors. Well, let me tell you something. A so-called celebrity or an actor is nothing more than a court jester. They're not. What makes them qualified to tell me who I should vote for or what I should believe? What gives them the qualification? Because they're entertaining me? That's not a qualification. And yet
Uh,
that's what we look to in today's world. And again, it goes back to my book, God, Money, and Sex, which money has become our God and materialism has become the altar that we worship at. And so, consequently, if you don't like where we are in the world, whether it's in New Zealand or Russia or China or the USA or in Canada, Canada's a mess right now, then it's because we have allowed that and we bought into it, and we're afraid, and we become too weak to stand up and think for ourselves.
Tell me this. What do you think we should do about social media? I mean, if it's possible, I mean, would you support getting rid of it? I mean, what's your thoughts on social media and the implications
Well,
of
I'm
what's happening?
again, I'm a realist. I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist.
Yeah.
Social media is not going to go away. I've gotten shut down 3 times on Facebook and Instagram, and I think I'm still shadow banned on X because I wasn't going along with the controlling narrative in COVID, and I wasn't slamming the controlling narrative, although I could have. But during COVID, for instance, I was out saying to people on Instagram and Facebook, "Hey, take vitamin C, large quantities of vitamin C, get lots of sunshine, take high quantities of zinc, and get to the gym and exercise, boost your immune system." They shut me
Yeah.
down, and they said that was against community standards. Really? Okay. I mean, I'm not even slamming, which I very well could have, the controlling narrative. I was just saying, "Hey, boost your immune system because God's immune system is way more powerful and
Mhm.
way more strong than anything I can inject into my arm that's man-made." And there's a whole host of things that go along with that one, which we're finding out now too. And so consequently, there's a lot of those things that have crept up on us little by little, and they're not any different. These go all the way back to Kennedy and FDR. I mean, and I apologize for using just USA examples, but the USA really uh, drives the world in a large sense. People aspire to be here. There's nobody, leaving here to immigrate elsewhere. Everyone's wanting to come here because we're supposed to have freedom and liberty and the ability to make our own choice and all those kinds of things. Well, that's slowly going away, unfortunately. And if you don't see it, then you're still very indoctrinated and you're very asleep at the wheel. Social media is not going to go away. I'm on social media and they shut me down 3 times, but you know what? I refuse to quit. I get back up. I used to have tens and tens and tens of thousands of followers and over 150,000 on Twitter at one point. Well, I don't anymore because I've been shut down and I have to start a new account all over again. But
Yeah.
but I'm not going to stop. And so but I'm a distributor of information. I'm not a consumer. I think if we're wise, we don't consume social media because social media, you know, if you go on Instagram, because my wife and I are on Instagram, talking about our principles and talking about our business. And now just recently, we've been shut down on TikTok, which is really interesting because we were talking about Anthony Fauci, and they didn't like that. And so consequently, you know, it's a fact that TikTok is controlled by China, and we've now proven that the COVID virus came out of China. Well, they probably don't like that. So they've suppressed it and shut it down on TikTok. And so consequently, you just don't quit. You just keep doing what you're doing. And if they shut my account down again, all right, it's not the end of the world. I'm going to speak the truth and I'm going to go out speaking the truth regardless of the consequences, because I can lay my head on a pillow at night and feel good about doing what I'm doing versus doing something to try to get more followers and get more likes. And
Mhm.
I've had tons of marketing, so-called marketing experts that I've hired to come on who said, "Well, you've got to do this and you can't say that because you'll alienate some people." I said,
Mhm.
"I'm going to say what I believe is true. And if it attracts the right people, then there's power in common principles and values. There's not power in numbers. There's power in common principles and values. When your circle gets smaller, Paul, then your values and your virtues and your principles get clearer because there's not power in numbers. And so consequently, there's a few good people can literally change the world, and they change the world by doing what's right. And it goes back to Carl Jung's collective consciousness. You put into the collective consciousness, and I know that sounds a bit esoteric, but this is quantum physics,
Yeah.
period. You put that into the collective consciousness and it starts to make a shift and a dent in the collective consciousness. And consequently, it creates an attractor field that literally attracts other people of like heart and mind, and then it starts to build some momentum. So, long answer to your question, forgive me, but I wouldn't say let's get rid of social media, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the only place I get my news today is on X. I log in. I don't spend a lot of time there because it can be very depressing, and that's not a powerful thing either. But I learned about the Carolina storms, and I learned about there's one coming towards Florida, and maybe you've heard about these things, and they're horrendous and they're horrific, and yet I've got to stay in tune with the world, because to not be involved in politics is to be ruled by evil men. If you turn away from what's going on in the world, and you turn away from things that are happening in the collective sphere, then you're just turning over your power to whoever is going to do what they want to do.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, we only may only be one individual, but we still have an ability to do something, rather than just turning away, as you say, and doing nothing, and then complaining because you don't like how things are going. Well, you haven't done anything to try and change it.
Well, and we can change it. I talk about this in God, Money, and Sex, my latest book. There are things that seem small, like my wife Birsma and I refuse to support any companies that perpetrate a woke ideology, because we just won't give them our finances. And sometimes it's problematic because you have to go search elsewhere to get the things that you want to get. But we can do this. Look at what happened at Budweiser. Budweiser came out with Dylan Mulvaney on the can, and people went crazy. I don't know if you heard about that in New Zealand, probably
No,
did.
I
Um,
don't.
but he's a transgender is the new term, and they put him on the can of Budweiser, the supposedly man's beer, and the collective went nuts, and they boycotted them, and they lost millions, if not billions of dollars. Disney has lost millions, if not billions of dollars, because people have unplugged from what they're propagating. And so you might think you're just one person, but when one gets one gets one gets one gets one, then you can truly make a shift.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to all remember that and do our bit to try and make the world a better place to live.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, God knows we need it. It right now we're going through hell in a lot of places in our world, and people think that world is going to hell, and I say no, we're not going to hell, we're going through hell. And when you go through hell, you have to walk through like you own the place. You have to keep going, and
Yeah,
to
don't give
the
up.
degree you become complacent and roll over, then you just give in to the dark forces, and what they talked about in the book of Ephesians, what Paul talked about. You give in to those principalities and powers and evil in high places. And so consequently, when you get fed up enough, and that's what's happening, that's the good news of all this, is that more and more people are waking up and saying, enough already. Enough already. I'm going to push back on this. And we see this all around the world. And I'm not advocating, riots or anything of that nature. It doesn't have to be that way. It just has to
Mm.
be, I will not comply. I'm going to do what I believe is true in my heart, and I'm going to stand on that and stand for that. And consequently, maybe I'll rub off on someone else as well. Um, but it takes a lot of courage. It really does.
It does. It does. And unfortunately, too many people don't have the courage or the willingness to devote the effort required to try and do their bit to make a difference.
Well, they will. They will. What I can guarantee you is that life will push you there eventually,
Mm.
because God and good always win. I'm certain of that. God and good always win. You read the book of Revelations, which I've read again recently, and I don't know if you've read it, but man, that's a tough read. It's all symbolism and metaphors and illustrations and analogies, and it's a tough read. And yet the good news is that we go through these wars with these dark forces and these people trying to take us down into places where we're totally victimized and we don't have any power anymore. But in the end, God and goodness wins, and I'm holding to that.
Look, James Arthur Ray, thank you so much. It's always really enjoyable to talk to you. You share a lot of knowledge and wisdom, which is greatly appreciated. So, thank you for your time. And yeah, I appreciate everything that you've shared and look forward to staying in touch.
Well, I appreciate you having me back, and if it's okay with you, Paul, I'd like to give a gift to your viewers.
Absolutely.
If you are ready to bring yourself back to freedom, then I'd like to help you. And what we've done is we put together, if you go to Harmonic Wealth Global, I know that's a mouthful, harmonicwealthglobal.com/freedom, then we have a freedom blueprint that's absolutely free. And you can download it, and it has you ask some probing questions of yourself to start to do some of the things we've talked about here: shift consciousness, communication, culture, take responsibility, become more self aware. And so just go to harmonicwealthglobal.com/freedom. And we'd love to help put that tool in your hands for absolutely free. And hopefully it'll help you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that offer. And once again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. God bless you, Paul. Keep doing great work.